thank you very much. Not least the organizing committee and the Slovenian government, once again, thank you very much. I'm going to, well, basically introduce you to about 60 million years of work-related stress. And yes, there we are. 60 million years, a history of 60 million years of work-related stress. And basically, we are going quite rapidly through it, so don't hesitate to tackle me later today or tomorrow for specific details. Well, whether we are talking about chronology, so evolutionary biology, or hierarchical, meaning something like godness, divineness, so to say, it's a matter of fact that the human brain neurobiological system is either the end point or the top of information processing technology. And it's always funny to reflect to the fact that organizations like NASA are investing billions of dollars in attempts to find, say, a few dead bacteria on Mars, but we never ever in the galaxy found any type of comparable cognitive functioning system like the human brain. So congratulations. The most marvelous piece of technology anywhere in the galaxy, as far as we know, is in your head. And originally, companies like IBM and Google planned to have a computer that would have the processing capability of one human brain around 2020. And that was the plan, and it's now again for the fourth or fifth time delayed, because there are every time again some surprising technical challenges to be covered. Additionally to that point, Ernst Haeckel already reflected that the ontogenesis recapitulates the phylogenesis, meaning that our individual development on the right-hand side actually copies the trajectory of evolution. So every stress-related type of organ we find in any other type of animal or organism or microbiome, basically, we can find in the human body and the human neurobiology as well. A few additional remarks with regards to aging. Obviously, so the very old, so to say, brainstem type of functions and physiology is rapidly developed in the womb already, and through up to the 25th year, the rest of the brain, stage by stage, is being developed. That makes us quite prone for developmental distortions, disturbances, and external pressures. Not surprisingly, all kinds of syndromes and symptoms associated with aging generally start in processes related to the frontal cortex being there, and then with aging, the quality of the processing dynamics decreases back to the primary life functions like breathing, temperature regulations, etc., etc. Yeah, if dementia would start in the brainstem over here, we wouldn't have Alzheimer's disease, because one would die quite early in the process, and you would never notice the decline in memory functions, etc. Well, having said that, mankind being stressed, so to say, and actually it's an arbitrary term. Thank you very much, Nathan, for your marvelous presentation, because we tend to, consider stress in the perspective of mental stress, psychological stress, burnout, workload, things like that. But basically for human physiology, there's not much difference for deprivation, hunger, thirst, sleep, for temperature pressure, viruses, metabolic pressure, too much sugar, decade after decade after decade, as compared to, for example, psychological stresses, workload, social interactions, etc. So, from a fundamental perspective, we can say that this typical stress response, both in time and in domains, is sequential. So the physiological responses followed by hormonal reactions, and eventually you start thinking and wondering why you got in this mess anyway. Yeah? And so a very straightforward conclusion was, well, basically implicit, but it seems to be, well, brilliant when you're talking to employers, that by default means that there is no discrepancy in work and private time. So you will bring your private stressors, challenges, financial, family, other burdens to your work, and vice versa. You will take your irritations, annoyances, work overload with you somewhere in your system back home. It's all cumulative. I'm sorry. So there comes the relevance, Janus, thank you very much, about this work-life balance. Fit for life, fit for duty, our soldiers nowadays say. And additionally to that point, that means that every, so to say, domain has well-known protective lifestyle factors. When we're talking about burnout over time, getting overloaded over time, getting sick, a particular disease, a chronic disease over decades, versus being able to operate fit, healthy, with motivation, joy, and sustainable. And of course, an incredible body of literature has been processed the last decades on how we get in time, we get sick, we get diseases from, for example, work-related stress, indeed interacting with all these factors associated with aging. And basically, and then we're going quickly in depth, that all has to do with the concept of allostasis. Allostasis is the process of trying every time you're, so to say, hit by a stressor, might be a virus, might be an annoying, pressing manager, might be something else, deprivation, hunger, thirst, whatever. Your body is trying to find the homeostatic balance in a way. And it puts a tremendous amount of resources in. But that over time may accumulate in what we call allostatic load. So you are putting so many resources in your survival today that you will eventually pay the price somewhere in a distant future. But who cares? Who cares if you significantly increase the risk to develop something like type 2 diabetes in 20 years' time if you won't survive the meeting today at your office? So we are basically, how to say, programmed to put disproportional resources and efforts in our short to mid-term survival at maybe the expense in 20 years. Who cares? There's no effective feedback loop to warn us that we are actually, you should have something like a counter telling us, okay, you had such a tough day today, so your, the risk of developing type 2 diabetes today increased with so many numbers. So very good, you had a healthy dinner today, you did some exercise, you really relaxed, so your risk of developing diabetes in 20 years' time steadily decreased with so many points or something. There's no rapid feedback mechanism yet available. And so what are we basically talking about? Well, the allostatic process in general is quite healthy. It makes us, able to do something like Olympic sports, to grow, to become fitter, better, cleverer, better able to cope with these viruses. If you get an illness, well, quite regular, not too much, but regularly. But at a certain point of time, for example, psychologically speaking in relation to trauma, it may, so to say, overcome you, and in the end may change basically the setup of all these physiological and endocrine systems that are associated with, well, overcoming stress of any kind. And that's what allostatic load is being referred to. And we know you won't, thank you very much, Nathan, you won't be presented the ticket, the bill, the check today, but it will be presented to you in due time. And once again, indeed, interacting with all these fancy genotype, phenotype, individual diversity we have in our population. So basically, some can, in some domains, cope better than others. Well, to put it more technically, one component of allostatic load is being not quite able to cope with whatever type of overtime, whatever type of stressor comes at you. And here is a fancy finding indicating that if you have repeated stressors and you're fit and you're well able to cope, it means that over every incident you're well able to, well, reduce the impact it will have on your physical fitness or your mental well-being. And the funny thing is, this repetitive pattern mimics very much the nicotinergic effects. This difference is the benefit of smoking. So cognitive processes are going some cognitive processes are going more efficient when you use nicotine. Okay? And in the 90s and early 2000s, there was quite a discussion going on whether nicotine might indeed be protective for the development of dementia disorders, dementia type of disorders. And I reflect on that a little bit later, whether or not that might be the case. Other functions involved, obviously the HPA axis, producing corticosteroids, stress hormones, and Juster, one of our keynote, our headsmen, our gurus in the allostatic literature and science, indeed identified individuals with high and low allostatic load that they differentiate on their cortisol stress hormones profiles. So maybe the next generation of 24A life type of products should actually measure cortisol. Would be easy if it would be, well, so straightforward as that. But unfortunately it isn't. And once again, as you could see in the neurobiology, these processes are all interacting with each other. And so basically, at any side of the disturbed system, you could capture, assess types of stressors or disturbances that may indicate the development of an allostatic load. And quite some of them already are quite popular in applications like, well, apps on your mobile phone, measurements at your general practitioner's office, etc., etc. Though interestingly, for example, psychosocial symptoms highly interact with all these hormonal and physiological factors. So, at least theoretically, we should be able to construct an assessment battery that includes them all to upgrade the accuratesse, the reliability of any measurement on allostatic load and allostatic progress. Interesting study related to workload was by Almadi et al., published 2013, and well, basically because it showed this. And on the left-hand side, it's the incidence of the metabolic syndrome. Generally, you know, important symptom being a fat belly. Yeah, so a little bit growing into obese with all these nasty symptoms and mid to long-term epidemiological health risks as well. And it appeared that if people indeed reported to be stressed at their work and cortisol profiles over the day were significantly higher, the incidence of this particular epidemiological issue in most Western countries rapidly increased. So it's not about one single factor, but it's typically about the interaction between a few. Social emotional, workload, physiological, and even worse, inflammatory. Same picture. Yeah? So when not reporting too much stress, yes, you can have some inflammation, inflammatory processes that are indeed related to the incidence of this metabolic syndrome. But once again, the high-risk group here, well, it is related to a stressed environment, what is being reflected or associated with these overall high stress hormone concentrations, either saliva, urine, whatever, hair. So they're now in hair analytics of stress hormones. I'm doing fine on the time? Great.
You still have 7 minutes.
We'll manage. Don't get stressed. So the basic point, we're talking about the multimodular dynamics. And it's complicated, and it's huge, and it is wide, and please all join our research team, because then we can, you know, investigate it in the 20, 30, 40 years to come. It will be great. And though, obviously there are some first or some prominent, you know, linking pins in this process. Because every time again, heart rate variability pops into the picture. Well, that's something to be easily measured, is it not? Of course, but there we've got, for example, the inflammatory response. And then it appears that, for example, in a circadian rhythm, simply when you're going along, day and night rhythms, they are inversely related. So, well, they are interacting all the time, basically. So that makes something like an allostatic load factor analysis a cumulative, complicated, sum of so many diverse factors. But the good news being that all of these obviously are associated with typical epidemiological outcomes, say, mid to long term. All these statistics, these general statistics, you see back in about lifestyle, well-being, healthy aging, terms like diabetes, obesity, cardiovascular, and basically from some particular perspective one could argue, well, you know, actually it's arbitrary what will eventually be the symptoms and the syndromes you will develop, because basically they tackle back 10, 20 years back in time on lifestyle factors like exercise, diet, workload, and of course a little bit of genetic, chance, so to say. And then we are talking about the concept of heterostasis. So not homeostasis, balance within one system, hormones, cardiovascular, your mental state, but basically these generally divided systems that are trying to cover each other's asses. Yeah? So to cover each other's backs. If you're a little bit overloaded, I make some extra hormones so you can cope. But if it starts to become chronic, I cannot provide every time again more hormones and more hormones and hormones, because I won't have sufficient hormones for the inflammatory process. So then I will develop typical symptoms associated with hormonal disturbances. Initially subtle, but over time chronic. And there, once again, the allostatic load comes into play. And obviously, thank you very much for the lecture this morning about aging and work-related factors. Of course, it's cumulative. So it's inevitable that over time, this check will be presented. By definition, it's not presented to youngsters. Although there are many young people nowadays who, around their 30s, already run into burnout. Well, then quickly, let's make it applicable again. What should we do with this notion? Well, for example, we have this balance between physiological responses and hormonal responses. And there seems to be some type of optimum. We discussed sports and performance and athletes yesterday. Yeah, so there is some kind of optimum for the best performance you can provide, either today or a midterm. Yeah? But if these two become too intensive, related to each other, it seems that it, rapidly becomes unhealthy. They have to correct for each other's, pressure, coping issues all the time. And then the mid to long-term disturbances evolve. So from a very flexible, not over-interactive, but easily irritative process into a more rigid process, eventually over time accumulating in overt diseases. Well, and it starts early. So we can already identify these risks in adolescence. Someone referred already that, so these early life risk factors and lifestyle factors that contribute for a lifetime of rapid aging, cumulative risk factors to develop eventually type 2 diabetes, etc. Well, here it is. And it's related to social emotional functioning in adolescence as well. So basically the take-home message from this slide is, yes, we can in a way quantify this allostatic load development being underway. It is possible. This is not, of course, the only study. And for example, we did it in elderly as well. So Mayo Clinic, thank you very much, with Professor Bruce Johnson, who just got a seat. And there it is. So you can even, and it's the funny thing, it's that's generally combining physiological with social emotional factors. Once again, incorporating many different physiological, endocrine, mental factors within one model. And, well, I'll skip this because then we can rapidly close down. Fortunately, quite recently, the Lothian birth cohort was published, and it's amazing. It's amazing. And meaning that in 1947, the Scots in Edinburgh, Glasgow, managed to do a full day of IQ intelligence testing on almost every 11-year-old, 70,000 something. And somewhere around 2000, in a cellar, they found these tests back. So then they were able to find all surviving individuals of this cohort, and they started asking all these lifestyle type of questions. So retrospectively, how their life had been, obviously they could, well, assess them on their health and well-being, being then aged approximately 70, 68, 70. And so it was a marvelous set and masterpiece, so to say, to get all this information together and analyzed. So, question then. That's Ian Deary, the principal investigator. A very nice fellow, by the way. And scoring high on many of the factors that will pop up within a second. So what are these factors related to healthy mental aging? Well, non-smoking, there goes the nicotine myth. And is it about smoking or is it about nicotine? I'm not sure yet, because obviously smoking is not that healthy. But on the other side, what might nicotine do without you smoking nicotine? But again, yeah? So it's not about smoking. Have less damaged white brain matter. And there's an asterisk, because obviously, while aging, the proportion white brain matter is prone to so many factors. Not least of them, indeed, diet, genetic factors, cardiovascular health, etc., etc. So it's a very strong, but it's a factor that should or might be investigated more in depth. Being physically more active over a lifetime, not last week, over a lifetime. Yeah? Speaking more than one language. Well, there might be a rationale, of course, because that might keep your cognitive fit. It takes processing capabilities, so every time I have to change, and there's some mental effort involved. Higher educational level, yeah? I'll get back to that in a few seconds. That will be the last remark. Yeah. But important for today, proportionally a more professional occupation. So, fill your life significantly with working, with, finding yourself, contribute, be active, be socially engaged, have colleagues on the work floor. It was a factor on itself. So we had a lot of discussions about, how can we make the work floor happy and stimulating for aging employees. On the other side, having happy aging, civilians, yeah. Obviously, having a profession, being at work is a factor there. So it's the other way around as well. And funny thing, eventually the genetic difference only accounted for a smaller proportion of these findings. Yeah? The issue with higher educational level is twofold. One, of course, it's associated with almost every lifestyle protective factor you can imagine. Unfortunately, people with lower education, lower intelligence scores, lower social economical status have typical diet patterns that are not so healthy. Tend to prefer the television instead of sport. Tend to have the more demanding, physically demanding type of jobs as compared to, well, the type of work most of us are engaged in. Yeah? So, and lastly, the second important, of course, argument here, the total research plan was based on an IQ test. Yeah? So, not surprisingly, being not so clever aged 11 came out as a very causal factor in all these other identified factors. That's something for statisticians to cover in the future. Well, having said that, thank you very much. Our enterprise continues. We've acquired quite a size European research project, and everyone in the room with a master of being quite close to it is happily invited to consider to strengthen our healthy aging research team in the Netherlands. Thank you very much.